Miriam, how does University Lands decide, like what criteria do you guys use when you're awarding acreage, I guess, or when you're picking tenants or leaseholders?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because it depends on whether it's a surface lease or a subsurface lease. So some of you may be aware that we have a lease sale, every so often. Sometimes they're annual, sometimes they're a little further apart from each other than that, depending on what acreage is available. So we just had a lease sale at the end of 2022 that was very successful. In that case, we set a minimum bonus and then the royalty for any tracts or acreage that we're putting in the lease sale. And the bonus amounts are based on what we're seeing operators pay for fee acreage that may be either similar or offset. It's based on the technical evaluation that the University Lands teams have done on what we think the prospectiveness is of the acreage. So is it multi-bench? Is it just one bench? Is it oil? Is it, and some associated gas? Is it very heavy in the gas side? So we do a lot of that analysis in-house and apply that to what our minimum bonus is and what our royalty rates will be for the subsurface lease sales. On the surface side of things, those projects are done differently. There's different project economics and timelines. And so what we're really looking at up front is what is the company's reputation? What is their financial stability and viability? What is their proposal? What is their timeline? What has their stewardship of the environment looked like previously? And so we'll take all those things into account and then of course do a technical evaluation of what they're proposing and a financial evaluation as to how it impacts or can bring value to the PUF lands.
Okay. Are there other criteria like sustainability or emissions or broader ESG credentials? How are you addressing some of those, drivers in the industry when you're working with some of these operators?
So our standard lease forms, and like I said, if you've been a part of our lease sale before, you've read them. They're pretty long, but there are a lot of requirements of operators on us. And what I can say just generally and in summary is that there is a requirement to abide by and comply to all regulatory requirements on our lands. We also require operators to follow best practices. And then we have ourselves policies that protect aquifers. We encourage, water recycling. Spills on the lands are required. So there's a lot of different policies, all very open and very transparently communicated either on our website or through our teams to ensure that anybody that is operating on us, either on a surface lease or in the subsurface, is doing so to the best of their ability and taking care of the lands in a way that they steward them forward. It's also a requirement of anyone that's on us that when they're finished operating or the project is complete, that they return the lands to their original or condition or better.
Okay, and how do you see, operators, the publicly listed operators versus the private operators? Do you see big differences in the way they approach some of these questions? What approaches are they taking?
So I think that's an interesting question that I think the industry should do a better job, and we can help as University Lands to do a better job of advertising the things that they're already doing. We are seeing very strong responses from public companies to making commitments to reduce emissions, but we're really seeing that same behavior out of private companies as well. And if I think back to 5 or 10 years ago compared to now, it's behavior that we're seeing across the board from operators. So, in some cases it may be coming from investor. In a private equity space, it may be coming from the backers. And I think a lot of people are talking about it's just the right way to do business, right? The people that work in the oil and gas space understand this is an industry and a business that we've really been entrusted to provide energy. Mm-hmm. And part of that is doing it in the right way. So I think that companies across the board, both public and private, are making commitments to building their facilities in a way that they're minimizing emissions, to putting more automated monitoring in place. We have operators on us that are incredibly responsive, whether it's on an emissions leak notification or a spill remediation, that are I think that have really put it into their price of doing business, that part of being in the oil and gas space is doing this and doing it right. And I think technology has come a long way too. And people are really committing to using that technology to operate in the best way they can.
Miriam, I know when I was doom scrolling on Twitter a few days ago, and then I saw a picture of somebody who was flying into Midland or out of Midland, and they took a picture where there were like a bunch of oil and gas wells, of course, but then a lot of them had solar panels around it, and so obviously there's a lot of effort that's underway to cut Scope 1 and of course Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. But University Lands also leases a lot of acreage for renewable energy. So can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe also talk a little bit about how some of your partners are maybe using some of this renewable energy in their oil and gas operations, if you can.
Sure, yeah. So University Lands has been active in the renewable space, like you said, for some time. They have 7 wind leases or pre-leases that are about 86,000 acres, and then 8 solar leases that are about 8,600. So in total, right around 95,000 acres that's committed to really the traditional renewable solar wind type leases. So that has coexisted for some time with our oil and gas development and does so very well. One of the big projects the University Lands is undertaking is looking at what we call the emerging energies and the viability of that on our acreage. And so we're working with the Bureau of Economic Geology, otherwise known as the BEG, which is a part of UT Austin, and they are taking a look at our lands and working with us and our data to understand what we think the inventory is on university lands, what acreage is prospective for the different emerging energy opportunities. So whether it's geothermal, wind, solar, CCS or CCUS, really, and then I think even beyond that, and some of the things that we're not really hearing about now, but that may be prospective in the future. And for us, it's a very wide, expansive acreage. So in addition to it being 2.1 million acres of surface, if you look at the extent of it, it's like the size of Alabama, the state of Alabama, that people are having to look at and to understand, to analyze, and then react to. So it helps a lot for us to work with the universities and with a group like the BEG to understand what we have so that we can react to it and that we can work with companies that are coming to us, or that we can proactively approach them. So we think that University Lands is very well positioned to participate. Our acreage is in large contiguous blocks, which I think is very helpful and very appealing to a lot of the folks that are wanting to do things on the surface. And I think for us, the real key is understanding what the opportunities look like, what the economics of those opportunities look like, and how University Lands participates in those. But I'll just reiterate, we have been a part of the renewables and the wind and solar for quite some time. As far as how operators are kind of, I think, partnering those technologies together, I'm less familiar with that. I think I've seen what you're describing as well. For us, it's really been what you were describing, right? Where we're seeing a lot of our geologists and our engineers and the folks that work in accounting or land that are traditionally have been oil and gas experts using those skills and applying them to the emerging energies. So for University Lands, that's been a lot of what we're doing. But we're really, I think, in the earlier stages on some of these other technologies of understanding what the opportunities would be on our land.
Okay. I'm curious, I don't know if you guys do this kind of analysis, but when you look at the return on a per acre basis for a predominantly renewable energy project versus a predominantly oil and gas project, what does that look like?
Well, I think we can all guess what those look like. What I will say is we wouldn't necessarily look at those two together. We generally don't find that you're picking one versus the other. Those projects don't compete for the same space for the most part. What I will say is that we do have considerable grazing leases on university lands. There's a very strong and robust grazing history, and where those can coexist, it's really positive. I would say the economics of a ranch that has cattle versus renewables is probably more in line with what we would compare. And the renewables, have a lot of support. You guys talked about the government support that they're getting. So the projects work. I think, though, that a lot of what people are doing now is committing and then looking at a project that probably has, an 8 to 10 year timeline to actually get up and running. And so our hope is that technology is going to continue to build and that things will continue to improve. From perspective of university lands, what's most important to us is the financial stability of the company that's coming to us. So while we're looking at the project economics, we're more so looking at what kind of capital commitments do they have, what type of capital commitments have they gotten in the past, do they have a history of signing land leases and selling them, or do they have a history of acquiring those and keeping them and then operating. And I think from a perspective of an organization that is looking to steward the lands for the very long term and also do it on behalf of the state, those are really the key metrics for us to look at versus the economics of the project itself.